When I say the names Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, these names mean something to you. They're all tech billionaires. They've made something. You know their companies. You know their history. What if I say the names Izzy Englander, Stevie Cohen, Ken Griffin? These names, Jim Simons, these are names you've never heard of. But what if I told you that these names and these men have also created businesses as big, maybe not as big, but as profitable per capita as the tech billionaires that I mentioned before? Hi, my name is Shalabh Garg. I'm a 25-year veteran of Wall Street. I've done jobs in banks and hedge funds. I currently run my own hedge fund. And in today's podcast, we will cover what is a hedge fund, how to run your own hedge fund, when to run your hedge fund, and all things hedge funds, because it's a word you should know and learn more and more about. What separates a hedge fund from any other investment vehicle? To start with, it is an investment vehicle, a way to buy and sell securities and derivatives for one goal and one goal only, that is profit, right? But there are other investment vehicles that do that as well, like asset managers, like BlackRock and Vanguard. They do the same thing. So what is it that separates hedge fund from everyone else? Forget the word hedge fund, that's just a word, because they don't hedge. Hedge funds don't hedge. There is one thing that differentiates them from everyone else, that is leverage. Leverage, leverage, leverage. Whereas everyone uses $100 to buy $100 worth of things, hedge funds use $100 to buy $400, $500 worth of things. And how do they do that? Where do they get that extra $300, $400 from? They get that from banks. So hedge funds are in cahoots with banks. They need banks more than banks need hedge funds. Banks provide liquidity to hedge funds, so hedge funds can operate, and they provide capital to hedge funds, so hedge funds can get what I'm describing as leverage. Why is leverage such a big deal? Let's say you like a sweater. You buy that sweater for $100, and you sell that sweater to your friend for $200 because she did not know what the original price of that sweater was, and that was still available for $100. You made a handsome $100 profit. You're so happy having done that. Now for a minute, you think about, you only had $15 in your pocket. You saw this sweater for $100, which you think you can sell for $200 to someone else, but you only have 15. So you go to your mom and say, Mom, can you lend me $85 for about 10 days? And I'm going to return it back to you in $85. And I'm not even going to return you $85. I'm going to give you $85 plus some interest on it, a $5 extra on top. Give me $85, I'll return you $90, no more than 10 days. Your mom loves you, trusts you, she gives you $85 and she goes, don't even return it back to me, keep it. Well, banks are not like that, but your mom is. You take the $85, you use your $15, you buy that same $100 sweater, you again sell it for $200. Now you had 15 in pocket. You take the 85, you take the $5 extra, you're a nice person, you return that 85 plus 5 back to your mom, you're left with the $100, but how much did you have to start with? Only $15. You made $100 of profit on $15 of capital. You saw how that worked? The $15 you made 6 times profit, where in the first example, all you made was 100% profit. So leverage can enhance your returns in a multiple way, in a way that no other thing can in this entire world. People hate leverage for good reason. You talk to Warren Buffett, he will tell you, I hate leverage. I never use leverage. Why does he hate leverage? He's a very smart guy. Why does he hate leverage? He hates leverage because leverage works really well on the way up and equally poorly on the way down. In that example of the sweater, now think about how you bought that for $100, and while you were about to go to your friend to sell it, there was an advertisement, and there are 10 other sweaters of the same kind being sold for $85 or $90, $75 or $80. Now how are you going to sell that sweater to your friend for $200? She's not going to buy it. So now you're stuck holding that sweater for $100. The price of that has gone down to $85, and you offload it at a loss at $85. In the example where you had no leverage, you only lost $15. In the example that you had leverage, your entire $15 is wiped out because you have to return that $85 back to your mom. Still, all you're left with, all you had was $15 of your own capital. You're 100% wiped out. Your entire hedge fund, that hedge fund that you had $15 of capital in, is wiped out on the first trade. That's how quickly it goes down. There is one more thing that separates hedge funds from other kinds of investment vehicle. That is their ability to short. In the example of the sweater, not to keep going back to that amazing, beautiful sweater, what if instead of buying that sweater was selling for $200 in that same store, and you thought it was worth only $100? And you said to yourself, I want to short this sweater. I want to sell this sweater to my friend for $200 even before I have bought it, wait for the price of that sweater to go down by 100, and then I want to buy it back at 100 and make that same $100 profit. Now that's a difficult transaction to make, right? Because you've sold something short to a friend, you don't have it in your possession, and you're hoping to buy it back at a lower price later and then sell it back and then neutralize the transaction to make that's a much, much harder transaction. Nobody in the world does that except for hedge funds. And those are the two primary things that separate hedge funds from everyone else: leverage and the ability to go short. If you understand those two concepts well, you for the most part understand what a hedge fund does differently from anyone else. Why does everyone want to work at a hedge fund? And why is it that hedge funds can produce billionaires? Where if you watch one of my previous podcasts, the same question with respect to a bank I had answered by saying it is very hard to be a billionaire at a bank. So why is it that a hedge fund can produce billionaires in finance, and one of the only two industries, second one being private equity, that consistently produces billionaires when they're successful at doing what they do? The reason again goes back to the point of leverage. Hedge funds charge what is known as an incentive fee. They say to you that in the example of that sweater, on any profits earned, I will keep 20% of those profits for myself. In the example where you said that you made a $100 profit, 20 cents of that $100 or $20 of that $100 will stay with you as profit. So as if that example goes up in the sense that you make $1 billion of profit doing what you did, you would get to make $200 million of incentive fee before you return the rest of the profit back to the investor that you took the original capital from. This incentive fee makes a hedge fund business way more lucrative than any other in finance. Because if you know how to make money in a path-dependent format, and I'm going to come back to what I mean by path dependency, and path dependency attaches itself to leverage again as well. So leverage is a word that's going to come up again and again and again in this podcast, because that is what separates hedge funds beyond being the ability of being short. But this incentive fee, the fact that they keep 20% of profits for themselves, is what separates them from anyone else in any other industry in finance, and what makes billionaires out of hedge funds on a consistent basis, not just limited to the names that I took. There's at least 50 to 60 billionaires in the entire industry. The entire industry does not employ that many people. Hedge fund as an industry worldwide probably employs less than 5,000 people. So it's not a big number of people that work in this industry, simply because it's very hard to make money with leverage. Why is it so hard to make money with leverage and without leverage? Let's cover that for a minute. When you have a levered investment, it is not important that point A to point B, your purchase price of something and your sale price of something, is profitable. What is equally important is the path that it takes from going from point A to point B. In the example of the sweater, where the purchase price was 100, let's assume that it took you 3 months to sell it, and it did ultimately get to 200. But now let's make a caveat to it, that it didn't just get to 200, it first went down from 100 to $20, and then rose from 20 to become 200. Now, if you were unlevered, you just sat it out. You were sitting with the $100 sweater, 3 months have passed by, when it got to 200, you sold it, you made your handsome $100 profit, everybody's happy, great. But now assume that the $85 lender that you borrowed from was not your mom, but in fact, someone who's profit motivated, and someone who is keeping that sweater that you bought as collateral, and making sure that that person can recover that $85 of loan that person made you. The minute that sweater starts dropping in price and goes to $50 or $40 or $45, the lender is going to go, look, this collateral has completely collapsed in price. I'm not going to be able to recover my $85. I don't care about your potential of $100 of profit. All I care about is the $85 loan that I made to you. I'm going to sell it at market, at the current price, and recover what I can. So the path dependency of where the sweater went from 100, first down to 50 or 40, and then to 200, meant that by the time it went to 200, you had no ability to hold that sweater, because the person you had borrowed money from took that sweater, sold it, took whatever money they could get out of it, wiped out your $15 of initial investment. You are out of luck, buddy. You made no money, you're out of your business. And yes, you can look back at it and go, oh, I had such a great idea. I saw this sweater selling for 100. It ultimately did go to 200. But you know what? You lost your business anyway because of the path dependency of what it takes. People talk about the stock market. Warren Buffett loves to say this, that over the last 100 years, the stock market has only had 2 or 3, 40 or 50% declines from any starting point. He's right. It has only been 2 or 3 times, 2002, financial crisis. The stock market does not go down 40 or 50% every 1 year or every 2 years. It has only happened 2 or 3 times over the course of a century. So a buy and hold investor like himself can see through it because he has no leverage. He does not care. He will hold it out through that 40% decline and then wait for it to rise to his cost and higher before he does anything about it. In fact, he may even buy more on that decline because he has so much free cash that's sitting there. That's not the story for a path-dependent investor. For a path-dependent investor, while the market is going down, his positions are getting wiped out. That person's positions are going wiped out by the lenders because they all have leverage. And that leverage can run into 3, 4, 5 times of the amount of capital they have of their own. That is what you get paid the big bucks for at a hedge fund, and that is what wipes out hedge funds all the time, the leverage and the path dependency of returns. Okay, what does it take to start this amazing product known as a hedge fund? Clearly, you need the ability to identify that cheap sweater more than other people in the world. And clearly, you need to know everything about the garment industry, about the buyers, about the sellers, about everything that goes into your ability to identify what you think is an undervalued asset or a really rich asset if you're looking to short it. That's not going to come overnight. I don't want you to think that, there are examples of individuals, like in any industry, there's always these extreme examples of someone who's finished college and started a company out of it. Ken Griffin is a great example. He started Citadel out of college and succeeded over the next 30, 40 years to create one of the biggest hedge funds in the country. But if you forget the extremes of examples, for the most part, the path to starting a hedge fund is to first create knowledge. You have to remember one thing. You can learn knowledge from other people's knowledge, but you cannot learn wisdom from other people's wisdom. So some amount of wisdom has to be generated through experience of doing that knowledgeable thing. So some amount of passage of time after college or business school, doing something either at a bank or at a hedge fund in a junior position is really, really important before you can say to yourself, I understand this strategy well, and I understand it better than anyone else so that I'm confident to start my own hedge fund. You know what? That's not enough. Beyond that, you need to have money in the bank. You cannot take any entrepreneurial risks such as a hedge fund. It's not the same as starting a tech firm, because in a tech firm, which is a huge area of entrepreneurship that young people start with, you don't really need knowledge innately the way you need knowledge at a hedge fund. Because you can say to yourself, I have this great idea that I'm going to have people buy products in a marketplace like eBay, or I have this great idea, and I know programming, so I'm going to use that programming to create this app, so on and so forth. It is a young people's business, I get it. Hedge funds, not as much. You need certain number of years, certain amount of knowledge, certain amount of expertise in something specific, and relationships. That's the last thing you need. You need relationships because you know what you're going to need? You need capital. You're not going to have, you cannot start a hedge fund with that $100 example, that I have $100, I'm going to buy a sweater. You need several $1 million of capital, if not more, to start a hedge fund. Ideally $15, $20, $25 million. That's going to come from a client that has worked with you, a client that has known you, a client that has seen you employ that strategy, either at another hedge fund or on your, or at a bank or wherever you may be, and is willing to take a shot on you and is willing to give you that opportunity of starting your own hedge fund. That capital can also come from multi-PMs. What is a multi-PM? Multi-PM are these really, really large behemoth of hedge funds. Some examples of them are Millennium, Citadel. These are very, very large hedge funds that have $50, $60 billion in capital. And if you're working for them for a few years and they've seen you employ a certain strategy, and if you're able to negotiate with them that I'm going to start my own hedge fund, and they will then back you with a few hundred or $1 billion of capital, that's another way that people start hedge funds. But in all of those cases, the one thing, and the one thing only that you cannot do without, is a strategy. A strategy that you understand better than anyone else, inside out. You know the product, you know the technology behind it, and something that will give you an edge to be able to make what is known as path-dependent investing. You are not going to be doing buy and hold investing, that I'm going to buy something, sit it out, and then sell it, because this is just not attractive enough return. Hedge funds are looking to make, on small amount of capital, levered returns. So they are thinking, if I have 50 million of capital, I may make only 10% on the capital, but on a levered basis, I will make 50, 60, 70%. So they are trying to make levered returns. And if they are trying to make levered returns, then that means path dependency matters. You cannot hide behind and say that, I don't really care what happens in the interim. I'm in it for the long run. You're not in it for the long run. You're in it day to day to day, week to week to week, month to month. A typical hedge fund has no more than 12 to 18 months to prove themselves. If you haven't made money in the first 12 or 18 months, most likely your investor base, your prospective clients, they will all lose interest. Nobody wants to deal with a hedge fund that thinks can make money in 2 years from now. They want to see the profit and the profit potential today and right now. So why did I do it? First of all, I did it at 45. I did not do it out of college. And I've said it already several times, I would not recommend doing it out of college or business school. 45 may be a little bit on the latter side. Most people that start hedge funds are in their late 30s, mid to late 30s, because, as I've always said to my kids, naivety of youth at some level is much more valuable than wisdom of age, because with age, you find yourself risk averse. And the one thing you cannot be when running your hedge fund is risk averse, because you start to think, I already have created such an amazing nest egg for me and my family. If I can just preserve it, it's a good amount of lifestyle. It's sort of like the European continent. They live a very high quality of life at a very high level, but when it comes to growth, they're basically a zero. If you want growth of economy, you have to come to America. You have to come to a vibrant emerging market. You're not going to get growth out of Europe. That's the same thing about an old person. An old person will generally be rich, but rich at a stable level with basically zero growth. That's not what a hedge fund is. You have to be excited about growth. And mid-40s, I would say, is already a little bit late to be starting your own hedge fund, because you have, let's say, 15 to 20 year runway, and people are looking like, why is he starting it so late? But it's still better than starting it at 25, when you don't have a strategy and you don't have an idea or don't have relationships. I started it because it was right after a couple of years after COVID. My wife had established herself in a very amazing celebrity career and was starting to produce a good amount of income. So I thought I could take the risk, and seeing her succeed in an entrepreneurial job herself gave me the motivation to do something of my own as well. And my downside became limited. I had done very well for 20 years leading up to that. My last job was as Chief Investment Officer. I'm sure you've all checked out my LinkedIn as a major hedge fund at a Japanese bank. So I had done well for myself. My wife had started to make a good amount of money, continues to make a good amount of money. And my kids were adults. So my older daughter was already in college. We had saved up enough for their lives. So, I felt like I was at a good point of life where I could take that risk. As an immigrant into the country, it was going to take a little longer, because as an immigrant, you worry about things like green cards and passports and stability and things of that nature. And all that had been taken care of because of the time that we'd been here. It doesn't have to be your story. Your story can be that you've done 10 years of work at a major bank, you've learned this strategy and you want to employ it. Your story can be that you've done 15 years of working for a senior PM at a hedge fund already, and have learned that skill, and you've seen some weaknesses that you can change, and hence you want to start your own hedge fund. In all those cases, make sure that 2 to 3 years of living expenses are in the bank. You do not want to be starting a hedge fund thinking that if I don't make money this next quarter, how will I pay my mortgage, my rent, or my private school tuitions, or my vacations, or any such thing. For 3 years, you do not want to be looking at anyone for income. That's number one. Number two, make sure that your spouse is on board. They understand. If they've been a Wall Street spouse, you've probably watched my podcast on how to be a Wall Street spouse. So they have already the skill of having to manage the ups and downs of being on Wall Street. Make sure to manage that well. Have an exit strategy. It may not work out. For most entrepreneurs, whether it's a hedge fund or otherwise, it often does not work out. It's not your fault. It's just the nature of starting something of your own. You underestimate things like costs of running your own hedge fund, people's salaries. Did you know, for example, that on top of people's salaries is something known as FICA? So if you offer someone a $100,000 job, cost to you will be $115,000 as an employer, because there's $15,000 of FICA that you have to match on top of it. I did not know that when I started my own hedge fund. There's a lot of things like health insurance you take for granted. You've always been in a W-2 income. Health insurance has come to you almost as a guarantee from someone. But now you're going to be a provider of health insurance. Those costs add up, each one of them. Rent for your working space, technology, vendors, every one of those costs is huge and massive. Hope you enjoyed that podcast. Clearly, I know everything there is to know about hedge funds. It's all I've done almost my entire life. With the exception of the first few years at a bank, this is all I've done. So feel free to book a consulting hour using the description page below. I'm happy to answer any questions, whether you're starting out as your own hedge fund, or even if you're at a hedge fund. Any questions that you may have, happy to answer. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Helps me grow my podcast. See you next time.